The mahogany casket gleamed under the funeral home's soft lighting as Kofi Mensah's family gathered around what they believed was his lifeless body. But from a hidden camera feed in the adjacent room, 72-year-old Kofi watched everything with eyes very much alive. His chest tightened as he observed his three children, Marcus, Amara, and Jabari, standing beside his corpse. This was it, the moment of truth. After building a billion-dollar empire from nothing, after sacrificing everything to give them the life he never had, he was about to discover what his family truly thought of him. What they really wanted. Who they really were when they thought no one was watching. The funeral director had just left them alone for a private moment, exactly as Kofi had arranged. His eldest son Marcus stepped forward first, and Kofi leaned closer to the monitor, his weathered hands trembling slightly. "Well," Marcus said, his voice cold and businesslike, "I guess this is it." Kofi's heart sank. No tears. No emotion. Just nothing. But then something happened that Kofi never expected. Something that would shatter every assumption he'd made about his family. Something that would make him question whether this elaborate test was the biggest mistake of his life. Marcus reached into the casket, and what he did next sent shockwaves through Kofi's entire body. The billionaire's hand flew to his mouth, his eyes filling with tears as he watched the monitor. He had prepared himself for greed. He had prepared himself for indifference. He had even prepared himself for celebration. But this he had never seen coming. And in that moment, Kofi Mensah realized that his test had revealed a truth far more devastating than anything he could have imagined. To understand how one of Africa's wealthiest men ended up watching his own funeral, we need to go back 6 months earlier, to the day everything changed. Kofi Mensah sat in his penthouse office in Lagos, Nigeria, overlooking the sprawling city that had witnessed his rise from poverty to unimaginable wealth. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, but Kofi barely noticed. His attention was fixed on the stack of documents before him, investigation reports he'd commissioned on his own family. His hands shook as he read through them again, though he'd already memorized every devastating word. Marcus, his 45-year-old firstborn, had been secretly meeting with competitors, apparently preparing to sell off portions of the family business the moment Kofi died. Amara, his 42-year-old daughter, had hired lawyers to contest the will she hadn't even seen yet. And Jabari, his 38-year-old youngest, had been taking loans against his future inheritance, already spending money he didn't yet have. The man who had turned a single food cart into a continental restaurant chain, who had expanded into real estate, technology, and manufacturing, who had employed thousands and lifted entire communities. This man felt utterly alone. Kofi had been born in a small village in Ghana, the son of a farmer who died when Kofi was just 12. He'd walked 15 miles to school every day, studied by candlelight, and worked 3 jobs to put himself through university. Every scar on his hands told a story of struggle. Every gray hair represented a night without sleep, building something bigger than himself. He'd married Abina, his childhood sweetheart, when he was 23 and she was 21. She believed in him when no one else did, had stood by him through the failed businesses, the crushing debts, the years of eating 1 meal a day so they could invest everything in their dreams. When the children came, Kofi had made himself a promise. They would never know the poverty he'd known. They would have everything. Education at the best schools in America and Europe. Opportunities he could only dream of. A future without limits. But Abina had died 7 years ago, and in her absence, Kofi had buried himself even deeper in his work. The distance between him and his children had grown. They lived in different countries now. Marcus in New York, Amara in London, Jabari in Dubai. They called on birthdays and holidays, always polite, always proper, but something essential had been lost. Or maybe, Kofi thought bitterly, it had never existed at all. He looked at the reports again. His children saw him as a bank account, a resource to be managed and eventually divided. The investigators had been thorough, too thorough. He'd read the text messages, the emails, the private conversations his children thought were secret. When the old man finally dies, we'll be set for life. I can't wait to sell that ugly house in Accra. It's worth at least 20 million. Dad's so obsessed with his legacy, he doesn't even realize we stopped caring about his stories years ago. Each word was a knife to his heart. That night, Kofi couldn't sleep. He walked through his empty mansion, past photographs of happier times. Abina holding baby Marcus. Little Amara on her first day of school. Jabari graduating from Harvard. All three of them together at the opening of the 100th restaurant in the Mensa Empire chain. Where had it gone wrong? He found himself in Abina's old study, the one room he'd kept exactly as she'd left it. Her books still lined the shelves. Her reading glasses still sat on the desk. And there, in a frame on the wall, was a quote she'd loved: "The truth will set you free, but first it will break your heart." That's when the idea came to him. What if he could see the truth? The real truth, not the pleasant lies families tell each other. What if he could strip away all the pretense and witness who his children really were when they thought he was gone? It was crazy. It was elaborate. It was possibly the most painful thing he could do to himself. But Kofi had to know. Over the next month, he planned everything meticulously. He contacted Dr. Adeyemi, his personal physician and closest friend, someone he'd known since university. After Kofi explained his plan, Dr. Adeyemi was silent for a long moment. "You're playing with fire, my friend," the doctor finally said. "What if you don't like what you find?" "I already don't like what I've found," Kofi replied. "But I need to see it with my own eyes. I need to know if there's anything real left, or if I've spent my whole life building an empire for people who never really loved me at all." Dr. Adeyemi agreed to help, though reluctantly. They would stage Kofi's death, a sudden heart attack, peaceful, in his sleep. The doctor would sign the death certificate. A trusted mortician would prepare a body double that could pass for Kofi from a distance. Hidden cameras would be installed throughout the funeral home and Kofi's estate. And Kofi would watch everything. His lawyer, Kwame, was the only other person who knew. Kwame had tried to talk him out of it, but Kofi was determined. They prepared multiple versions of the will, each to be revealed based on how the family responded to his death. "I've worked with wealthy families for 30 years, Kwame said as they finalized the plans. "I've seen greed do terrible things to people. But I've also seen love surprise us when we least expect it. Keep an open mind, Kofi." But Kofi's mind was already made up. The investigation reports had shown him the truth. This test would simply confirm it. The day came quickly. Dr. Adeyemi called Marcus with the devastating news. Kofi had died in his sleep. Massive heart attack. Painless and instant. The family was to gather in Lagos for the funeral. From his hidden location, a secure apartment connected to the funeral home through a series of underground passages, Kofi watched his children arrive. First Marcus, flying in from New York with his wife Jennifer and their 2 teenage sons. Then Amara from London, accompanied by her husband Terence. Finally Jabari from Dubai, alone as always. They looked appropriately somber in their black clothing. They hugged each other. They spoke in hushed tones. But Kofi, watching every micro-expression through the high-definition cameras, couldn't shake the feeling that they were performers in a play, hitting their marks and delivering their lines. The wake lasted 3 days, as was customary. Hundreds of people came to pay their respects. Business partners, employees, community leaders, people whose lives Kofi had touched. The outpouring was overwhelming. Person after person shared stories of Kofi's generosity, his wisdom, his impact on their lives. But Kofi barely heard any of it. His attention was fixed on his children. He watched Marcus spend most of the wake on his phone, texting with business contacts. He saw Amara complain to Terence about the accommodations, calling her father's mansion dated and provincial. He observed Jabari flirting with the young woman who'd been hired to coordinate the catering. None of them cried. Not once in 3 days. Maybe they were in shock, Kofi told himself. Maybe grief looked different than he expected. Maybe he was being too harsh. But then, on the night before the funeral, the cameras caught a conversation that confirmed his worst fears. The 3 siblings had gathered in Kofi's private study after everyone else had gone to bed. Marcus poured expensive scotch, Kofi's scotch, into 3 glasses. "Okay," Marcus said, his voice businesslike. "Let's talk about what happens next." "Shouldn't we wait until after the funeral?" Amara asked, though she took the offered drink. "We need to be prepared," Marcus insisted. Dad's empire is worth billions. The will reading is in 2 days. We need a united front. United for what? Jabari asked. For whatever surprises the old man left us, Marcus replied. You know how he was. Always trying to teach us lessons, even from beyond the grave. The old man. Not Dad. Not father. The old man. Kofi felt something crack inside his chest. What kind of surprises? Amara asked nervously. Who knows? Maybe he left everything to charity just to spite us. Maybe there are conditions. Maybe. He wouldn't do that, Jabari interrupted. We're his children. His blood. Everything he built was for us. Was it? Marcus asked. When's the last time any of us actually talked to him? I mean really talked, not just the obligatory phone calls. The room fell silent. He was impossible to talk to, Amara finally said. Everything was always about the business, about his legacy, about the struggles we never had to face because he suffered so we wouldn't have to. It was exhausting. I know, Marcus agreed. But that doesn't change the facts. We're entitled to this inheritance. We put up with his lectures, his impossible standards, his constant disappointment in everything we did. This is what we're owed. Kofi had heard enough. He turned off the monitor and sat in the darkness of his hidden room, tears streaming down his face. His children thought he owed them for the sin of loving them, of providing for them, of wanting more for them than he'd had. Tomorrow was the funeral. The final test. And Kofi already knew what he would find. Or so he thought. Because what happened the next day, when his children were left alone with his body for that final goodbye, would change everything Kofi thought he knew about his family, about love, and about the weight of secrets too heavy to carry alone. The morning of the funeral arrived with heavy gray clouds hanging over Lagos, as if the sky itself mourned. Kofi had barely slept, the conversation between his children playing on repeat in his mind. He sat in his hidden room, staring at the monitors that showed various angles of the funeral home's main viewing room where his body, or rather, the incredibly lifelike body double, lay in state. The casket was exactly as he'd specified, rich mahogany imported from Ghana, lined with white silk, surrounded by arrangements of white lilies and birds of paradise, Abina's favorite flowers. His body was dressed in his finest Igbada, the traditional West African robe he'd worn to his greatest triumphs, the opening of his 100th restaurant, his induction into the African Business Hall of Fame, his meeting with 3 different presidents. Guests began arriving at 8 in the morning. The funeral was scheduled for 11, but already the viewing room was filling. Kofi watched face after face pass by his casket. Some wept openly. Others stood in silent respect. Many shared whispered stories, memories of encounters with the great Kofi Mensah. There was Mama Ekwensi, the woman who'd given him his first business loan of $500 40 years ago when every bank had turned him away. She was 93 now, and 2 of his employees had to help her to the casket. She touched his hand and spoke in Igbo, her voice cracking. You made good on your promise, my son. You paid me back 1,000 times over, not just in money, but in the man you became. Rest well. Kofi's vision blurred with tears. There was Chidi, who'd started as a dishwasher in Kofi's first restaurant and was now the CEO of the entire food service division. Chidi knelt beside the casket for a full 5 minutes, his shoulders shaking. When he finally stood, Kofi could see his lips moving. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. There were former employees who'd used the education grants Kofi had secretly funded to become doctors, lawyers, engineers. There were children from the villages where his charitable foundation had built schools and hospitals. There were business partners who spoke of his integrity, his handshake being better than any contract. The outpouring of genuine love and grief was overwhelming. These people, many of them strangers to Kofi in name but connected to him through his work, his generosity, his impact, they mourned him truly. But his own children? Marcus stood near the entrance, greeting important guests, his political smile never wavering. He was charismatic, Kofi had to admit. He looked every bit the heir to an empire, tall and commanding in his custom-tailored suit. But Kofi noticed how Marcus's eyes kept flicking to his watch, how his conversations were calculated, networking even at his father's funeral. Amara positioned herself near the floral arrangements, accepting condolences with graceful nods and carefully measured tears that never quite fell. She was beautiful like her mother, with the same high cheekbones and elegant bearing. But where Abina's beauty had been warm and inviting, Amara's had an ice-cold quality that kept people at a distance. Jabari was the most visibly uncomfortable of the three. He kept moving around the room, unable to settle, his hands fidgeting with his phone, his tie, his cufflinks. Of all his children, Kofi had thought Jabari might be the most genuinely affected. He was the youngest, the one who'd spent the most time with Kofi before heading off to build his own life in Dubai. But even Jabari seemed more anxious than grief-stricken, as if he couldn't wait for this whole ordeal to be over. At 10:30, Reverend Okonkwo, who'd known the family for decades, approached the siblings. Before the service begins, I always offer the immediate family time alone with their loved one. Would you like a few private moments with your father? Kofi sat up straighter in his hidden room, his heart pounding. This was it. The moment he'd been waiting for. The cameras were positioned perfectly. The audio was crystal clear. Whatever his children said or did when they thought they were truly alone would reveal everything. Marcus nodded. Yes, thank you, Reverend. We'd appreciate that. The funeral director and Reverend Okonkwo quietly ushered the remaining guests out of the viewing room. Marcus's wife Jennifer took their sons to wait in the chapel. Amara's husband Terence joined them. Within minutes, the three Mensa siblings stood alone in the room with the body of the man who'd given them everything. Kofi leaned so close to the monitor his nose nearly touched the screen. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Marcus, Amara, and Jabari stood in a line before the casket, staring down at their father's peaceful face. None of them moved. None of them spoke. Then Marcus cleared his throat. "Well," he said, his voice flat and businesslike, "I guess this is it." Kofi's heart sank. No tears. No emotion. Just nothing. Marcus stepped forward, and for a moment, Kofi thought his eldest son might finally show some genuine feeling. Marcus reached toward the casket, and Kofi held his breath. But Marcus's hand went not to his father's hand or face, but to the breast pocket of the Igbada. Kofi watched in disbelief as Marcus's fingers searched for something, patting the fabric. "What are you doing?" Amara hissed. "Dad always kept his important documents close," Marcus whispered back. "Passwords, account numbers, safe combinations. He was old school. What if? Are you seriously trying to rob our dead father?" Jabari's voice cracked with disbelief. "I'm not robbing anyone," Marcus shot back. "I'm securing family assets." "There's a difference." "There really isn't," Jabari said. Marcus's jaw tightened. "Easy for you to say. You've been living off advances against your inheritance for the past 3 years. Some of us have been actually working, actually trying to hold this empire together while Dad was too stubborn to let anyone help him." "Hold it together?" Amara's voice rose. "You've been trying to dismantle it piece by piece. I've seen the proposals you've sent to competitors. You want to sell off everything Dad built. Because it's smart business." Marcus turned away from the casket, his facade of calm cracking. "Dad was brilliant, but he was stuck in the past. The restaurant industry is changing. We need to adapt or die." But he wouldn't listen. He never listened. "So you were just going to wait for him to die so you could do whatever you wanted?" Jabari asked. "Like you're any better?" Marcus shot back. "How much money have you borrowed against the inheritance?" $500,000. More. What did you even spend it on?" Jabari's face flushed. "That's none of your business." "It is when it comes out of my share," Marcus said. "Your share?" Amara laughed bitterly. "You sound like you've already divided everything up in your head. He's been dead less than a week, Marcus. Less than a week, and you're already fighting over the money." "Oh, don't act so sanctimonious," Marcus snapped. "You hired estate lawyers 6 months ago. 6 months before Dad died. What were you planning, Amara?" The color drained from Amara's face. How did you? I have resources, Marcus said coldly. Just like Dad did. You really think you could make moves like that without me finding out? Kofi felt sick. This was worse than the reports. Worse than the text messages. This was his children at war, and his body wasn't even cold yet. I hired lawyers because I knew you would try to take control of everything, Amara said, her voice shaking. You always do this, Marcus. You always have to be in charge, always have to prove you're the smartest person in the room. Well, guess what? Dad saw through you. He saw through all of us. What's that supposed to mean? Jabari asked. Amara turned to look at the body in the casket, and for the first time, Kofi saw something like genuine emotion cross her face. It means he knew. He had to have known. That we were all just waiting. Waiting for this day. Waiting for our turn. And he must have died knowing that his children didn't really love him. They just loved what he could give them. The room fell silent. Kofi's hands were shaking so badly he had to clasp them together. This was what he'd expected, wasn't it? This was why he'd staged this elaborate test. To confirm what he already knew. So why did it hurt so much more than he'd imagined? That's not fair, Jabari said quietly. That's not. I mean, we loved Dad. Of course we loved him. Did we? Amara asked, and now tears were sliding down her cheeks, real tears. When's the last time any of us called him just to talk? Not because it was his birthday or a holiday, but just because we wanted to hear his voice. When's the last time we visited without wanting something? Marcus said nothing. Jabari looked at the floor. That's what I thought, Amara whispered. She reached out and touched the edge of the casket, her fingers trembling. I don't know when it happened. When we stopped being a family and became this. Business associates. Heirs waiting for their inheritance. But somewhere along the way, we lost something. We lost him. He lost us first, Marcus said, but his voice had lost its edge. After Mom died, he just disappeared into his work. He had time for everyone else's problems, but never for ours. Every conversation became a lecture about hard work and sacrifice. He made us feel like we could never measure up, like everything we achieved was worthless because we hadn't suffered the way he did. Maybe because we didn't suffer, Jabari said softly. Maybe that's what he couldn't forgive us for. That we had it easy. That we got to be the princes who inherited the kingdom instead of the peasant who built it. In his hidden room, Kofi's tears fell freely now. They understood. After all this time, they understood. But the understanding came wrapped in resentment, in anger, in the bitter knowledge that the distance between them had grown too wide to bridge. I wish. Amara started, then stopped. She took a shaky breath and tried again. I wish we'd had more time. I wish I'd been brave enough to tell him that I was scared. Scared that I'd never be good enough, never be smart enough, never be strong enough to carry his legacy. So instead of trying, I just gave up. I stopped calling because every conversation reminded me that I was a disappointment. You weren't a disappointment, Jabari said. We all felt that way. That's why I moved to Dubai. I thought if I put an ocean between us, maybe the weight of his expectations wouldn't crush me anymore. But it followed me anyway. Marcus walked back to the casket and placed his hand on his father's folded hands. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I wanted to make you proud, Dad. Everything I did, every business decision, every risk I took, I was trying to prove I was worthy of being your son. But I could never tell if I was succeeding or failing because you never said. You never said you were proud. You never said I was enough. Kofi's chest heaved with silent sobs. He wanted to burst into that room, to tell them everything, to say all the words he'd never said. I was proud. I was always proud. You were always enough. But he couldn't. Not yet. The test wasn't over. What do we do now? Jabari asked. Marcus straightened, wiping his eyes quickly, rebuilding his composure like a man putting on armor. We do what we have to do. We get through the funeral. We hear the will. And then, I don't know. We figure out who we are without him. Who we are without him, Amara repeated. God, that's terrifying. Yeah, Marcus agreed. It is. They stood there together in silence for another moment, three siblings bound by blood and DNA and shared history, but separated by wounds too deep to heal with simple words. Finally, Marcus stepped back from the casket. We should let them know we're ready. People are waiting. As his children turned toward the door, Kofi noticed something. On the small table beside the casket where guests had been leaving cards and notes, Amara paused. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her purse and placed it there, hiding it under some of the other cards. What was that? But before Kofi could wonder further, the funeral director was returning, and his children were being ushered into the chapel for the service. The viewing room emptied, and Kofi was left staring at the monitors, his mind reeling. His children resented him, but they also mourned him. They were angry, but they were also hurt. They wanted his money, but they also wanted his approval, even in death. Nothing was as simple as he'd thought. Nothing was as clear as the investigation reports had made it seem. And that note Amara had left, what did it say? Kofi needed to know. He needed to see it. But the funeral was about to begin, and he had to watch that first. The eulogies, the testimonials, the final farewell. He had to see it all. The funeral service lasted 2 hours. It was beautiful and heartbreaking and everything Kofi had never wanted to think about regarding his own death. Reverend Okonkwo spoke eloquently about Kofi's life, his journey from poverty to prosperity, his impact on countless lives. Chidi gave a eulogy that had half the chapel in tears, talking about how Kofi had seen potential in a scared 19-year-old kid with nothing and had given him not just a job but a future. Mama Ekwensi was helped to the podium, and she spoke in a mixture of English and Igbo about the young man who'd come to her door 40 years ago with nothing but a dream and a determination that reminded her of her late husband. But the most powerful moment came when Marcus, Amara, and Jabari each took turns at the podium to speak about their father. Marcus went first. He was polished and eloquent, his speech clearly prepared and carefully crafted. He spoke of Kofi's business acumen, his strategic mind, his ability to see opportunities where others saw only obstacles. It was a perfect eulogy for a mogul, for a titan of industry. But it was also, Kofi noticed, completely impersonal. Marcus could have been talking about any successful businessman. There were no specific memories, no personal anecdotes, nothing that spoke to the relationship between father and son. Amara's speech was different. She stepped up to the podium with visible reluctance, her hands shaking as she unfolded a piece of paper. But when she began to speak, her voice was steady. My father was not an easy man to know, she began, and Kofi tensed. Where was she going with this? He was driven by demons most of us couldn't understand. He'd experienced poverty that would break most people, and it forged him into someone who could never rest, who could never feel secure, no matter how much success he achieved. She paused, looking out at the assembled crowd. I spent most of my life trying to understand him, and most of that time failing. But in his death, I'm starting to realize that maybe understanding wasn't what he needed. Maybe what he needed was for us to see him, really see him. Not as a provider or a benefactor or even as a father, but as a man who carried scars we never acknowledged and pain we never tried to heal. Amara's voice cracked. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry I never asked about your pain. I'm sorry I only saw what you gave and never saw what it cost you to give it. I'm sorry I waited until you were gone to finally see you. She folded her paper and walked back to her seat, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. Kofi's vision was blurred with tears. He hadn't expected that. Hadn't expected Amara, of all his children, to cut through all the pretense and speak the truest words he'd heard in years. Then Jabari stood. He didn't have prepared remarks. He walked to the podium slowly, his hands empty, his eyes red. I don't know what to say, Jabari admitted, his voice rough. Everyone here knew my father as this force of nature, this success story, this example of what's possible with hard work and determination. And he was all of those things. But he was also my dad. Jabari's face crumpled, and for a moment, Kofi thought he wouldn't be able to continue. But Jabari took a breath and pushed forward. He was the dad who taught me to ride a bike when I was 5. Who stayed up all night with me when I had nightmares. Who came to every single one of my football matches, even when he was building his empire and barely had time to sleep. He was there. He was always there. Jabari wiped his eyes. But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing that. I stopped seeing him as my dad and started seeing him as this standard I could never meet. And the more impossible that standard became, the more I pulled away. Until one day, I realized we barely knew each other anymore. And I thought there would be time. I thought I could fix it later, when I had my life together, when I'd finally accomplished something that would make him proud. His voice broke completely. But there is no later now. There's just this. This moment. This goodbye. And I never got to tell him. I never got to tell him that I loved him. Not as the billionaire or the empire builder or the legend. Just as my dad. Jabari couldn't continue. He left the podium and collapsed into his seat, his shoulders shaking with sobs that echoed through the chapel. The funeral ended with a traditional burial ceremony. Kofi's body would be interred in the family mausoleum next to Abina, exactly as he'd planned. The procession to the cemetery was long, hundreds of cars following the hearse through the streets of Lagos. But Kofi couldn't watch anymore. He sat in his hidden room, his head in his hands, everything he thought he knew about his family shattered into pieces. They weren't perfect. They were flawed and selfish and had made terrible choices. But they were also hurting. They were also lost. They were also his children, carrying wounds he'd given them without ever meaning to. What had he done? What had he done? Hours later, after the burial, after the reception, after the last guest had left and night had fallen over Lagos, Kofi made his way through the underground passage to the funeral home. The building was empty now, dark and silent. But he had to see that note. The one Amara had left beside his casket. His hands shook as he picked it up from among the other cards and letters. He unfolded it carefully, and in his daughter's elegant handwriting, he read, "Dear Dad, I know you can't hear me now, but I need to say this anyway. I know I was a disappointment to you. I know I never lived up to what you wanted me to be. But I want you to know that I tried. Every single day, I tried. And when trying wasn't enough, I broke. I broke, and I didn't know how to tell you. So I pushed you away instead. It was easier than admitting I wasn't strong like you. I wasn't brave like you. I was just me. Scared and lost and wondering if there would ever come a day when my father looked at me and thought, she's enough exactly as she is. I'm sorry I never gave you the chance to tell me if that day ever came. I'm sorry for so many things. But mostly, I'm sorry I never told you that you were my hero. Not because you were rich or successful, but because you loved Mom with your whole heart, and when she died, you kept going even though I know part of you died too. That took more strength than building any empire. I see that now. I love you, Dad. I always did. Even when I forgot how to show it. Your daughter, Amara." Kofi sank to his knees on the floor of the funeral home, the note clutched to his chest, and wept like he hadn't wept since the day Abina died. What had he done? What had he done? His test had been meant to reveal the truth about his family. But the truth it had revealed was far more complicated than he'd imagined. His children weren't villains. They weren't saints either. They were human. Flawed and struggling and carrying their own pain. Pain he'd caused. Pain he'd never even known he was causing. And now, watching his own funeral, hearing his children's broken confessions over his dead body, Kofi faced the most terrifying question of all. Had he made the biggest mistake of his life? And if so, how could he possibly make it right? Because the will reading was scheduled for tomorrow. And the final phase of his test, the part that would determine everything, was about to begin. But after everything he'd witnessed, Kofi wasn't sure he had the strength to see it through. Kofi didn't sleep that night. He sat in his hidden apartment, Amara's note spread on the table before him, watching the words blur as exhaustion pulled at his eyes. The funeral had ended hours ago, but his mind wouldn't stop replaying every moment. Marcus's cold efficiency cracking to reveal the desperate sun beneath, Amara's raw confession, Jabari's breakdown at the podium. He'd designed this test to expose greed and betrayal. Instead, it had exposed something far more painful, a family shattered by misunderstanding, by unexpressed love, by the weight of expectations no one could carry. Dr. Adeyemi arrived at dawn with coffee and breakfast that Kofi didn't touch. "You look terrible," the doctor said bluntly, settling into a chair across from his old friend. "I feel worse," Kofi admitted. His voice was hoarse from crying. "I've made a terrible mistake, Femi." "Then stop it," Dr. Adeyemi said simply. "Call it off. Walk into that will reading today and give them the shock of their lives. Tell them you're alive. Tell them the truth." "And say what?" Kofi asked bitterly. "That I faked my death to spy on them? That I trusted them so little I had to stage an elaborate test? That will destroy what little trust remains. What remains is already broken, my friend. Last night proved that." Dr. Adeyemi leaned forward. "But it also proved something else. Those children love you. In their broken, imperfect way, they love you. Don't let pride keep you from salvaging what's left." Kofi shook his head slowly. "It's too late. The will reading is in 3 hours. Everyone's expecting closure. And I need to see one more thing." "What could you possibly need to see that you haven't already?" "What they do when they think I'm really gone," Kofi said. "When the shock wears off and reality sets in." The funeral was emotional, but emotions fade. I need to know what comes after. Whether they'll honor what I built or tear it apart. Whether they'll stay family or become strangers fighting over money. Dr. Adeyemi studied him for a long moment. "You're still looking for a reason to justify the distance between you. Still trying to prove that pushing them away was the right choice." The words hit like a physical blow because they were true. "What if I've already lost them?" Kofi whispered. "What if this test, this foolish test, is the final nail in a coffin I've been building for years?" "Then you'll have your answer," Dr. Adeyemi said quietly. "But Kofi, my friend, my brother, ask yourself what you're really hoping to find today. Because if you're looking for perfection, you'll be disappointed. If you're looking for proof that you were right to doubt them, you'll find it. But if you're looking for a reason to forgive, to rebuild, to start again, that's there too. You just have to be willing to see it." After the doctor left, Kofi showered and dressed in fresh clothes. He checked the camera feeds one final time. His children were gathering at his estate for the will reading, scheduled for 10 o'clock in the main study. Kwame the lawyer was already there, setting up documents on Kofi's massive desk. The study had been Kofi's sanctuary, the place where he'd made every major decision of his adult life. The walls were lined with books, business texts, biographies of great leaders, African history and literature. His desk was mahogany, carved by craftsmen in Ghana, a gift to himself when his company went public. Behind the desk hung a portrait of Abina, painted from a photograph taken on their 20th anniversary. She was laughing in the painting, her head thrown back, pure joy captured in oil and canvas. Kofi had spent countless hours in that room, often working until dawn. How many family dinners had he missed sitting in that chair? How many of his children's milestones had passed while he was on the phone making deals? The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd built an empire to secure his family's future, but in doing so, he'd sacrificed their present. At 9:45, Marcus arrived first, as always punctual to the point of obsession. He wore a different suit than the day before, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, his power armor back in place. The raw emotion from the funeral seemed to have been carefully packed away. He shook Kwame's hand. "Thank you for arranging this so quickly." "Your father left very specific instructions," Kwame replied carefully. The lawyer was one of only 2 people who knew Kofi was alive, and the strain showed on his face. "Everything is in order." Amara arrived next with her husband Terence. She looked exhausted, her eyes puffy despite carefully applied makeup. She'd changed from her funeral dress into a simple black pantsuit, her hair pulled back severely. She looked, Kofi thought, like someone preparing for battle. Jabari was 10 minutes late, stumbling in with bloodshot eyes and clothes that looked slept in. He'd been drinking, Kofi realized. His youngest son had spent the night drowning his grief. "Sorry," Jabari mumbled. "Rough night." "We all had a rough night," Marcus said sharply. "This is important, Jabari. Try to focus." "I am focused," Jabari shot back. "I'm focused on the fact that our father is dead and we're about to fight over his money like vultures. How's that for focus?" "Nobody's fighting," Amara said quietly, though her tone suggested she expected exactly that. "Let's just hear what Dad wanted and respect his wishes." The three siblings and Terence took seats facing the desk. Marcus sat in the center, the natural leader position. Amara was to his right, Terence beside her. Jabari slumped in the chair to Marcus's left, looking like he might be sick. Kwame cleared his throat and opened a leather portfolio. "Before we begin, I need to tell you that your father's will is unconventional." Kofi Mensah was many things, but predictable was not one of them. "Just read it," Marcus said. "Whatever surprises he left, we can handle them." Kwame's eyes flicked to the camera hidden in the bookshelf, and Kofi knew his friend was thinking the same thing he was. They had no idea what was coming. "Very well," Kwame said. He pulled out a document and began to read. "I, Kofi Emmanuel Mensah, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." The standard legal language followed: revocations of previous wills, declarations of competency, appointment of executor. Kofi watched his children's faces as Kwame read. Marcus was attentive, listening for every detail. Amara stared at the portrait of her mother, her expression unreadable. Jabari just looked miserable. Then Kwame reached the important part. "To my beloved children, Marcus, Amara, and Jabari, I leave the following." Everyone leaned forward. "I leave you nothing." The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't quite detonated yet. "What?" Marcus's voice was barely audible. Kwame continued reading, his voice steady despite the tension crackling in the room. "Not because you don't deserve it, and not because I don't love you, but because I have failed you as a father, and leaving you my fortune would only compound that failure." "This is insane." Marcus stood up. "He can't do this. There are laws." "Please let me finish," Kwame said firmly. "Your father was very thorough." Marcus sat back down, his face flushed with anger. Kwame read on. "I built an empire from nothing because I had to. Because poverty was my teacher and necessity my motivation. You never had those teachers. You never felt that necessity. And that was my gift to you. A childhood without struggle, a life without the fear that kept me awake at night for decades." In his hidden location, Kofi's hands gripped the edge of his desk. These were his words, written months ago when anger and disappointment had clouded his judgment. Hearing them now, after the funeral, after Amara's note, they sounded cruel. "But in giving you everything, I gave you nothing that mattered. I gave you money but not wisdom. Opportunity but not purpose. Security but not strength. And for that, I am profoundly sorry." Amara's hand flew to her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Therefore, my estate will be divided as follows. 50% will go to the Mensah Foundation, to continue the charitable work that has been my proudest achievement. 25% will be held in trust for my grandchildren, to be accessed when they reach the age of 30, with the hope that they will have found their own paths by then. And the remaining 25%? Marcus's voice was tight with barely controlled fury. "The remaining 25%, Kwame continued, will be placed in a special trust to be distributed to Marcus, Amara, and Jabari under the following conditions." Here it was. The final test. The culmination of everything Kofi had planned. "Each of you must spend 1 year working in the business I built, starting from the bottom. Marcus, you will work as a line cook in the original restaurant where I started. Amara, you will work as a housekeeper in the hotel division. Jabari, you will work in the warehouse managing inventory. You will receive standard wages for these positions, no special treatment, no executive perks. You will live on what you earn, in the communities where you work." Jabari let out a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. At the end of that year, if you have completed your assignments, you will each receive your share of the inheritance. But more importantly, you will have learned what I tried and failed to teach you. That wealth means nothing without understanding the work that creates it, the people who create it, and the responsibility that comes with it. Kwame looked up from the document. There's more. A personal letter to each of you. But first, do you have any questions? The silence was deafening. Then Marcus exploded. A year? A year as a line cook? Is this some kind of joke? I have a life, Kwame. I have a business in New York. I have responsibilities. I can't just drop everything to play out Dad's fantasy of teaching us a lesson from beyond the grave. You can refuse, Kwame said calmly. The will is clear. If any of you choose not to participate, your portion goes to charity. Your father anticipated that some or all of you might decline. Of course I'm declining. Marcus was pacing now, his composure completely shattered. This is manipulative and controlling and exactly like him. Even in death, he has to prove he's smarter than us, better than us. Well, I don't need his money. I've built my own career. With the connections he gave you, Amara said quietly. With the education he paid for. With the safety net he provided. Marcus whirled on her. What, you think this is fair? You're going to defend this? I don't know if it's fair, Amara said, wiping her eyes. But I understand it. He wanted us to understand him. To walk in his shoes, even just for a little while. It's punishment, Marcus said bitterly. Punishment for not being good enough, for not suffering enough, for not being him. Maybe, Amara acknowledged. Or maybe it's the only way he knew how to give us what we actually needed instead of what we wanted. What about you, Jabari? Marcus turned to his younger brother. You've been awfully quiet. Jabari looked up, his eyes red and wet. I'll do it. What? I'll do it, Jabari repeated, his voice stronger. 1 year. I'll work in the warehouse. I'll live on those wages. I'll do whatever the will says. You can't be serious, Marcus said. Why not? Jabari asked. What else do I have? I'm 38 years old, and I don't have a job, a purpose, or apparently any money since I borrowed against an inheritance I'm not getting. At least this gives me something to do. Maybe it'll even give me something to be. Amara nodded slowly. I'll do it too. Have you both lost your minds? Marcus demanded. Maybe, Amara said. But Marcus, what are you running back to? Your business in New York that Dad's connections built? Your network that exists because of his name? Or are you running away from the possibility that he might have been right? That we don't actually know what it means to build something real? I know exactly what it means, Marcus said coldly. I've been building my own empire while you two were coasting on his reputation. Then prove it, Amara challenged. Prove you can do what he did. Start from nothing. Work your way up. Show us that you're not just Kofi Mensah's son with a good suit and a prestigious education. Show us you're actually your father's child. The words struck home. Kofi could see it in Marcus's face, the doubt creeping in, the pride warring with fear. In his hidden room, Kofi held his breath. This was the moment. The choice that would define everything that came next. Marcus stood rigid, his jaw clenched so tight Kofi worried he might crack a tooth. Finally, he spoke. Fine. 1 year. But not because I think this is right or fair. Because I'm not going to let him win, even from the grave. I'll do his test, and I'll prove that his way isn't the only way. That suffering doesn't make you noble, it just makes you suffer. Kwame nodded. Then I'll make the arrangements. You'll each receive your starting assignments next week. Your father also left personal letters. Would you like them now? Yes, Amara said. Kwame distributed 3 sealed envelopes, each marked with a name in Kofi's distinctive handwriting. The siblings took them but didn't open them immediately. Is there anything else? Marcus asked. "Just one thing," Kwame said. "Your father wanted me to tell you that he loved you. That everything he did, every decision he made, was done out of love. Even this. Especially this." Marcus's laugh was bitter. "That's not love. Love doesn't manipulate. Love doesn't test. Love trusts." He stood and walked out, still holding his unopened letter. Amara and Jabari remained seated. After a moment, Amara broke the seal on her envelope and pulled out several pages in her father's handwriting. Her eyes moved across the words, and fresh tears spilled down her face. Jabari opened his letter too. As he read, his shoulders began to shake. Kofi couldn't see what he'd written to them. Those letters had been composed in anger and disappointment months ago, before the funeral, before he'd heard their confessions. He tried to remember what he'd said. Had he been harsh? Accusatory? He couldn't recall the exact words, only the feeling of betrayal that had guided his pen. Whatever he'd written, it was having an effect. Amara pressed the letter to her chest, her eyes closed, her mouth moving in what might have been a prayer. Jabari folded his carefully and put it in his jacket pocket, then stood and walked to the portrait of his mother. "I miss her," Jabari said softly, talking to the painting. "Every single day, I miss her. She would have known what to do. She always knew how to talk to him, how to make him laugh, how to make us feel like a family instead of a business. Mom, I'm so lost. I've been lost since you died, and I don't know how to find my way back." Amara joined her brother in front of their mother's portrait. She took Jabari's hand, and they stood there together in silence. "Do you think he knew?" Amara asked quietly. "How much we loved him. How much we needed him." "I don't know," Jabari admitted. "I hope so. But I think maybe he was as lost as we were. Maybe he didn't know how to reach us any more than we knew how to reach him." "The letter," Amara said. "Mine says he was proud of me. That he always was, even when he didn't know how to say it. That my strength was different from his, but no less valuable." "Mine says I have a good heart," Jabari said. "That I inherited Mom's kindness, and that was more important than inheriting his business sense. He said he wished he'd told me that while he was alive." They were quiet for another moment. Then Amara squeezed her brother's hand. "We should go. We have a lot to prepare for. 1 year, starting from the bottom. This is going to be interesting." "Interesting," Jabari repeated with a weak smile. "That's one word for it." They left together, leaving Kwame alone in the study. The lawyer looked directly at the hidden camera and shook his head slowly, his message clear. "Are you satisfied now?" Kofi wasn't satisfied. He was devastated. He'd written those letters to deliver hard truths, to explain why he'd structured the will as he had, to justify his test. But his children had read them as love letters, as apologies, as the words they'd needed to hear for years. And they were responding with acceptance, with grace, with a willingness to honor his wishes even though those wishes hurt them. This wasn't what he'd expected. He'd expected rebellion or greed or anger. He'd gotten all three from Marcus, but he'd also gotten something else, a family trying to understand, trying to honor, trying to hold together even as he'd done everything possible to tear them apart. What had he done? For the rest of that day, Kofi monitored his children through the network of cameras he'd installed. He watched Marcus return to the guest house on the estate where he and his family were staying. Marcus threw his letter across the room, poured a glass of whiskey, then retrieved the letter and read it again. And again. Whatever Kofi had written, it had gotten under Marcus's skin. He watched Amara and Terence pack to return to London. Amara kept pulling out the letter and rereading sections, her finger tracing certain sentences like she was trying to memorize them. He watched Jabari sit by the pool, still drunk, still heartbroken, but somehow more present than Kofi had seen him in years. His youngest son eventually took out his phone and made a call. Kofi couldn't hear the conversation, but he saw Jabari nod, saw him take notes. He was already preparing, already planning for his year in the warehouse. That night, something unexpected happened. Around 11 o'clock, Kofi's monitors showed all three of his children convening at the original Mensa Empire restaurant. the small establishment that had been the seed from which everything else grew. It was closed for the night, but they had keys. They let themselves in. Kofi quickly switched to the restaurant's security cameras. He watched his children move through the empty dining room, past tables where thousands of customers had eaten over the past 4 decades, into the kitchen where it all began. The kitchen was small by modern standards, barely large enough for the current staff. But it had been state-of-the-art when Kofi first opened. He'd worked in that kitchen himself for the first 5 years, cooking alongside his small team, learning every dish, perfecting every recipe. His children stood in the center of the kitchen, looking around like tourists in a museum. "He really started here," Jabari said, his voice filled with wonder. "With nothing but a dream and $500 borrowed from Mama Ekwensi." "The jollof rice was his signature dish," Amara said. "Remember? He used to make it for Sunday dinners when we were little. Mom said he'd spent 2 years perfecting the recipe, trying to capture the exact taste of his mother's cooking." "I don't remember that," Marcus admitted quietly. "I don't remember him cooking at all." "That's because you were older when things got busy," Amara explained. "By the time you were 10, he'd already opened 3 more restaurants. But before that, before everything exploded, he used to cook for us every Sunday. He'd tell us stories about starting the business, about the challenges he'd faced. It was nice." Marcus walked to the main stove, a massive professional range that had been upgraded many times over the years but still occupied the same spot where Kofi's original stove had been. "I'm going to work here," Marcus said. "For a year, this is going to be my world. This stove, these prep stations, this kitchen." "Are you scared?" Jabari asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Terrified. I haven't done manual labor since I was a teenager working summer jobs. I don't know if I can do this. Don't know if I want to. But, Amara prompted. "But I keep thinking about his letter," Marcus said. "He wrote that he wasn't disappointed in me. That was never what he felt. He said he was disappointed in himself. That he'd given me everything except the one thing that mattered, the knowledge that I didn't need his money or his name to be worthy. That I was enough, just as I was." Marcus's voice cracked. "How am I supposed to stay angry at that?" Amara moved to stand beside her brother. "You're not. None of us are. That's the whole point. Even now, even dead, he's still teaching us lessons. Still trying to shape us into something better." "Is it working?" Jabari asked. "Are we becoming better, or are we just becoming more confused?" "Maybe those are the same thing," Amara said. "Maybe confusion is the first step toward growth." They stayed in the kitchen for another hour, talking about memories Kofi thought they'd forgotten, sharing stories he didn't know they remembered. They laughed. They cried. They argued and reconciled and argued again. And through it all, Kofi watched from his hidden room, his heart breaking and healing in the same moment. These were his children. Flawed and struggling and imperfect, but also brave and trying and capable of more than he'd given them credit for. The test had revealed truth, but not the truth he'd expected. Tomorrow, they would begin their year-long journey. Marcus would report to the kitchen. Amara would start her housekeeping duties. Jabari would clock in at the warehouse. And Kofi would watch it all, invisible and removed, seeing everything but unable to participate. He'd designed this test to determine if his children deserved his legacy. But as he watched them leave the restaurant together, Marcus's arm around Amara's shoulders, Jabari making them all laugh with some joke Kofi couldn't hear, he realized the test had revealed something entirely different. The question wasn't whether his children deserved his legacy. The question was whether he deserved them. And the answer to that question terrified him more than anything else in his 72 years of life. The first week of his children's transformation was harder to watch than Kofi had anticipated. He sat in his hidden apartment with multiple monitors displaying different camera feeds, a silent observer to the unraveling and rebuilding of the lives he'd orchestrated. Marcus reported to the restaurant at 5 in the morning on Monday, as instructed. The kitchen manager, a no-nonsense woman named Chinyu who'd worked for Kofi for 20 years, didn't give him any special treatment despite knowing exactly who he was. "You're late," she said, even though Marcus was 5 minutes early. In this kitchen, early is on time, and on time is late. You start at 4:45. Tomorrow, be here at 4:30. Kofi watched Marcus's jaw tighten, watched him swallow whatever response wanted to come out, watched him nod and say, "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Put this on." Chinyu handed him a white chef's coat and a hairnet. "You'll start on prep. Onions, peppers, tomatoes. Everything needs to be diced to exact specifications. Chef Adewale will show you." Chef Adewale was a young man, probably in his late 20s, with quick hands and little patience for mistakes. He demonstrated the proper dicing technique once, then handed Marcus a knife and pointed to a mountain of vegetables. "We need all of this done by 7, Adewale said. "Service starts at 7:30, and if prep isn't ready, we all suffer. Don't slow us down." For the next 2 hours, Kofi watched his eldest son, a man who'd gone to Wharton, who ran a multimillion-dollar consulting firm, who negotiated deals worth more than most people earned in a lifetime, struggle to dice vegetables uniformly. Marcus's hands weren't used to the work. Within 30 minutes, he had a blister forming on his thumb. By hour 2, his lower back was screaming from standing hunched over the prep station. The other kitchen workers moved around him with practiced efficiency, a choreographed dance he couldn't follow. He was in the way. He was slow. He was, for perhaps the first time in his adult life, inadequate. And Kofi saw every moment of his son's humiliation. "Pick up the pace," Chinyu called out, not unkindly but firmly. "We don't have time for perfection. We need speed and consistency." Marcus nodded, sweat beading on his forehead despite the industrial air conditioning. His hands moved faster, but the cuts became less uniform. Adewale came by, looked at his work, and shook his head. "Start over on these. They're too big. The cooking time will be off." "I've been working on these for 45 minutes, Marcus said, frustration bleeding into his voice. "And now you'll work on them for another 45 minutes, but you'll do them right," Adewale replied. "This isn't a boardroom where you can talk your way out of mistakes. The food doesn't lie. Either it's done correctly or it's not." Marcus stared at the vegetables he'd have to recut, and for a moment, Kofi thought his son might walk out, might throw down the knife and declare the whole experiment finished. But Marcus took a deep breath, dumped his inadequate work into a container for stock, and started again. Across town, Amara was having her own baptism by fire. She reported to the Mensa Grand Hotel, a 5-star establishment that catered to business executives and wealthy tourists. The head of housekeeping, Mrs. Okafor, was a stern woman in her 60s who'd been keeping the hotel spotless since it opened 15 years ago. "You'll shadow Grace today," Mrs. Okafor told Amara, indicating a young woman who couldn't have been more than 22. "Watch how she does things. Tomorrow, you'll have your own rooms." Grace was efficient and friendly, chattering as she worked. "Each room takes about 30 minutes if you're experienced. 45 minutes when you're new. We have a quota, 14 rooms per shift. Fall behind and you work overtime without extra pay." Amara, who'd stayed in luxury hotels around the world, had never considered the work that went into maintaining them. Grace showed her how to strip beds in under 2 minutes, how to fold hospital corners that would pass Mrs. Okafor's white glove inspection, how to clean a bathroom to the point where every surface gleamed. "The trick is the order," Grace explained. "High to low, far to near. You start with the bathroom fixtures, then the mirrors, then the toilet, then the floor. In the bedroom, you do the TV and electronics first, then the furniture, then you vacuum. System is everything." By lunch, Amara's arms ached from pushing the heavy housekeeping cart. Her knees hurt from kneeling to scrub bathtubs. Her hands were raw from cleaning chemicals despite the gloves Grace had given her. "You get used to it," Grace said sympathetically during their 15-minute break. "First week is the hardest. But Mrs. Okafor is fair. Do good work, show up on time, don't complain, and she'll take care of you." "How long have you been doing this?" Amara asked. 5 years. Since I was 17. I support my younger siblings, 3 of them, all in school. This job, it's honest work and it pays enough to keep them fed and educated. That's what matters." Amara was quiet. She'd spent more on a single handbag than Grace probably earned in 6 months. The shame of it sat heavy in her stomach. In the warehouse district, Jabari was discovering that inventory management was far more physically demanding than he'd imagined. The warehouse supervisor, a gruff man named Amara, had put him on the loading dock. "We receive shipments, we log them, we store them, we prepare them for distribution," Amara explained. "Everything that goes into our restaurants comes through here. If we mess up, 200 establishments don't have what they need." "Understand." "I understand," Jabari said. "Good. Start with those pallets. Everything needs to be checked against the manifest, logged into the system, and moved to the appropriate section. You've got 4 hours to process what's here. Go." The pallets contained 50-pound bags of rice, crates of vegetables, boxes of cooking oil. Jabari had never done physical labor beyond recreational workouts at expensive gyms. Within an hour, his designer polo shirt was soaked with sweat. His hands, soft from years of office work and leisure, began to blister from handling the rough wooden pallets. A young man named Tund, maybe 19 years old, worked alongside him with easy efficiency. "First day?" Tund asked, grinning at Jabari's obvious struggle. "That obvious? You're moving like every box might explode. Relax. Find your rhythm. Save your energy, we've got 8-hour shifts, and if you burn out in hour 1, you'll never make it." Tund showed him techniques for lifting without destroying his back, shortcuts for scanning items into the system, ways to organize the work to minimize movement. The kid was smart, Jabari realized. Maybe not educated in the formal sense, but intelligent and capable. "How long have you worked here?" Jabari asked during a water break. 2 years. Saving money for university. Computer science. Another year of this and I'll have enough for the first 2 years of tuition. After that, I'll figure something out. You want to be a programmer? I want to build things, Tund said. Apps, systems, solutions. There's so much that could be better, you know? More efficient. I see problems everywhere, and I want to fix them. Jabari thought about his own university education, paid for without a second thought, followed by years of aimless wandering, never quite finding his purpose. This kid had purpose burning in his eyes, and all he needed was opportunity. By the end of that first day, all 3 of Kofi's children returned to their temporary accommodations exhausted, humbled, and changed in ways they were only beginning to understand. Kofi watched Marcus collapse on his bed in the guest house, still in his kitchen whites, too tired to even shower. He watched Amara soak her raw hands in ice water while Terrence rubbed her aching shoulders. He watched Jabari stare at the blisters on his palms, a small smile on his face that Kofi couldn't quite interpret. The days became weeks. Kofi established a routine in his hidden apartment. Wake early, monitor the camera feeds, take notes on what he observed, fall asleep to the blue glow of screens showing his children's new lives. He watched Marcus slowly improve in the kitchen. The blisters became calluses. The awkward movements became more fluid. Chinyu's corrections became less frequent. After 2 weeks, Marcus could prep vegetables as fast as anyone on the line. After a month, Adewale let him work the grill during lunch service. "You're getting there," Chinyu told him one morning, and Marcus's face lit up in a way Kofi hadn't seen since he was a child receiving praise from a teacher. But Kofi also watched the toll it took. Marcus's phone rang constantly with calls from New York, business matters that needed attention, deals falling apart without his guidance, clients threatening to leave. Marcus couldn't answer during his shifts, and by the time he finished at 2 in the afternoon, it was too late to call back. One evening, Kofi watched through the camera feed as Marcus's business partner, David, made an impromptu visit to Lagos. "You're throwing everything away," David said, pacing Marcus's small living room. "The Hartwell deal is dead. The Singapore expansion is on hold. Our clients don't understand where you are or what you're doing. I'm trying to hold this together, Marcus, but I can't do it alone." "I'm not asking you to do it alone," Marcus said tiredly. "I'm asking you to be patient. 1 year. That's all I need. 1 year is a lifetime in our business. By the time you come back, there might not be a business to come back to." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then maybe that's not the business I'm supposed to be in. David stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Listen to yourself. This is your father talking. Dead, and he's still controlling you, still making you doubt everything you've built. He's not making me doubt, Marcus said softly. He's making me see. For the first time in my life, David, I'm doing work that matters in a way I can touch and taste. I made 60 portions of jollof rice today. 60 families ate food I prepared with my own hands. That's real. That's tangible. Can you say the same about the last deal we closed? David left shortly after, and Kofi watched his son sit alone in the dark, his head in his hands, wrestling with questions Kofi recognized because he'd wrestled with them himself 40 years ago. Amara's journey was different, but no less transformative. She'd always been meticulous, detail-oriented, the child who color-coded her school notes and kept her room immaculate. Those traits served her well in housekeeping. By the second week, Mrs. Okafor was praising her work. By the fourth week, she'd been promoted to training new staff. But the work also opened her eyes to a world she'd been insulated from. Grace, her first trainer, became a friend. Amara learned that Grace sent most of her paycheck to her family in a rural village, keeping barely enough for herself to survive. She learned that 2 other housekeepers were working second jobs to make ends meet. She learned that the gleaming luxury guests paid premium prices for was maintained by people who could never afford to stay in such places themselves. One afternoon, Kofi watched Amara have lunch with Grace in the employee cafeteria. "Can I ask you something?" Amara said. "Do you resent them? The guests? The rich people?" Grace smiled. "Sometimes. When they leave their rooms trashed like animals live there, when they snap their fingers at us like we're not human, when they tip the bellhop $50 but leave nothing for housekeeping even though we're the ones who make their stay comfortable. But mostly, I don't think about them at all. I think about my brothers, getting good grades because they can focus on school instead of working. I think about my mother, who cries with relief every time I send money home. The guests are they're just part of the job." "You're extraordinary," Amara said quietly. Grace laughed. "I'm ordinary. I'm doing what millions of people do every day, taking care of their families the best way they know how. You want to know something funny? My dream is to own a small cleaning business someday. Just me and a few employees, doing commercial cleaning. I've been taking online courses in business management at night. Maybe in 5 years, I'll be ready." Amara was quiet for a moment. Then, "What if you didn't have to wait 5 years? Kofi leaned closer to the monitor, wondering what his daughter was planning. But before Amara could elaborate, their break ended, and they returned to work. Jabari's transformation was perhaps the most profound. He'd arrived in Lagos aimless and lost, drowning in debt and depression, his inheritance the only light in an otherwise dark future. That future had been yanked away, replaced with hard manual labor that left him exhausted every night. But something unexpected happened. The physical work, the routine, the simple satisfaction of completing tasks and seeing tangible results, it grounded him. For the first time since his mother's death, Jabari felt present in his own life. He became friends with Tund, the young man saving for university. They often worked late together, processing shipments and organizing inventory. Kofi listened to their conversations through the warehouse cameras. "Why Dubai?" Tund asked one evening. "What made you move there?" Jabari was quiet for a moment. "I was running away. From expectations, from the weight of my family name, from the feeling that I'd never measure up. Dubai was far enough away that I could pretend to be someone else." "Did it work?" "For a while. But you can't outrun yourself. Eventually, you're still you, just in a different location with the same problems." "Is that why you came back? For this job?" "I came back because my father died," Jabari said. "And I realized I'd wasted years running from a man who just wanted me to be happy. He never said it, he wasn't good with words like that, but I think that's what he wanted for all of us. To find something that mattered to us, something worth working for." "Have you found it?" Tund asked. Jabari looked around the warehouse, at the stacks of inventory, at the loading dock where trucks would arrive in the morning. "I don't know yet. But I'm looking. And that's more than I was doing before. Now, if you're watching this story and wondering what you would do in this situation, I want to hear from you. Would you accept your father's challenge? Would you work from the bottom up, or would you walk away from the inheritance? Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts. And if you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this unfolds. Also, where are you watching from? Comment your country or city below. Now, let's continue. 6 weeks into the experiment, something happened that Kofi hadn't anticipated. It was a Saturday evening, and the original restaurant was hosting a special event, a 40th anniversary celebration that Kwame had organized. The dining room was packed with employees past and present, community leaders, and people whose lives Kofi had touched over the decades. Marcus was working in the kitchen that night, part of the team preparing the feast. Kofi watched his son move through the organized chaos with increasing confidence, calling out orders, coordinating with the other cooks, his hands quick and sure. Chinyu pulled Marcus aside during a brief lull. "You've done good work these past weeks. Your father would be proud." Marcus froze. "You knew him well?" 20 years I worked for him. He hired me when I was a single mother with 3 kids and no prospects. Trained me himself, promoted me, paid for my children's education. Everything good in my life traces back to Kofi Mensah. "What was he like?" Marcus asked. "As a boss, I mean." Chinyu smiled. "Demanding." "Fair." He expected excellence, but he also gave you the tools to achieve it. He saw potential in people others overlooked. "You know what he told me when he made me kitchen manager?" He said, "Chinyu, I'm not giving you this position because you're perfect. I'm giving it to you because you understand that excellence is built one meal at a time, one choice at a time, one day at a time." That changed my life. Marcus's eyes were bright with unshed tears. He never talked to me like that. Everything was always about pushing harder, doing better, not being satisfied with good enough. "Maybe because you didn't need that kind of encouragement," Chinyu said gently. "You had every advantage, every opportunity. He pushed you because he knew you could handle it. People like me, we needed the softer words because we were already so close to breaking. But you were strong. He knew that. He just wanted you to know it too." After the dinner service, there were speeches. Mama Ekwensi spoke, her voice quavering with age but strong with conviction. 40 years ago, a young man came to my door with a dream and no money. I gave him $500, not because I thought he'd succeed, but because I saw in his eyes the same desperation I'd seen in my husband's eyes when he was building his own business. That desperation, that hunger, it makes you dangerous in the best way. It makes you unstoppable. Kofi Mensah was unstoppable, and look what he built. Look at all of you here tonight. This is his legacy. Not the buildings or the money, but the people. Always the people. Kofi wept openly in his hidden apartment, his face in his hands. The same night, Amara attended a different gathering, a birthday party for one of her fellow housekeepers in a modest apartment in a working-class neighborhood. Amara had been hesitant to go, feeling like an outsider, but Grace had insisted. The apartment was small, packed with people, filled with laughter and music and food. Children ran through the rooms while adults talked and danced. It was chaotic and loud and nothing like the refined gatherings Amara was used to. And it was the most genuine joy she'd experienced in years. Grace introduced her to everyone as her friend, not as her co-worker or as Kofi Mensah's daughter. Just her friend. And these people, who had so little compared to what Amara had known her whole life, welcomed her with open arms and generous hearts. Later, sitting on a small balcony with Grace and a few other women, Amara felt something crack open inside her chest. "My whole life," she said quietly, "I've been surrounded by wealth. Beautiful things, expensive things, exclusive things. But I don't think I've ever felt as rich as I do right now, sitting here with all of you." The women laughed and hugged her, and Amara cried, overwhelmed by the simple gift of belonging. Kofi watched his daughter through the security cameras he'd had installed in his employees' neighborhoods. Excessive, perhaps, but he'd wanted to monitor his children's progress everywhere they went. Now, watching Amara laugh and cry with these women, he realized his daughter had found something he'd spent decades building an empire to find: community. Meanwhile, Jabari was having his own revelation. Tund had invited him to his family's home for dinner, and Jabari had accepted out of politeness more than genuine interest. But the evening transformed into something unexpected. Tund's home was even more modest than Grace's, a 3-room apartment that housed Tund, his mother, and 2 younger siblings. The mother, a widow, worked as a seamstress. The apartment was immaculate despite its size, every surface clean, everything organized with care. "You honor our home with your presence," Tund's mother said when Jabari arrived, and he felt ashamed that such a simple visit could mean so much to them. Dinner was rice and stew, simple but delicious. The family said grace, thanking God for the food, for their health, for Tund's job at the warehouse, for bringing a new friend into their lives. After dinner, Tund showed Jabari his office, a corner of the bedroom he shared with his brothers, where an old laptop sat on a makeshift desk. Despite the ancient computer and limited resources, Tund had taught himself to code and had built several impressive programs. "This is the inventory system I designed for the warehouse," Tund explained, showing Jabari a sleek interface. "It's more efficient than what we're using now. I submitted it to Mr. Emeka, but he said the company has its own IT department for that kind of thing." Jabari studied the program. It was genuinely innovative, intuitive, and would save hours of manual work. "Tund, this is brilliant. You designed this yourself." "I watched YouTube tutorials. Took some free online courses. It's not perfect, but it's more than not perfect. This is professional-grade work." Jabari looked at the young man with new respect. "You said you need money for university. What if there was another way?" And that's when an idea began forming in Jabari's mind, an idea that would take root and grow into something that would change not just his life, but the lives of countless others. But Kofi didn't know that yet. All he knew was that his children, each in their own way, were transforming. The test he'd designed to humble them was instead healing them, opening their eyes to truths he'd learned decades ago but had somehow failed to pass on. They were learning what he'd tried and failed to teach them: that real wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, that real success isn't measured in titles or possessions, and that real legacy is built not in what you accumulate but in what you give away and who you become in the process. As the 6th week drew to a close, Kofi faced a terrifying question. What would he do when the year was up? When his children had completed their assigned tasks and earned their inheritance? When the time came to reveal that he was alive, how would he face them? Would they forgive him for the deception? Would they understand that he'd been trying, in his flawed and broken way, to give them the one thing his money couldn't buy? Or would his test, meant to reveal truth, become the final wedge that drove them apart forever? Kofi didn't have the answers. All he could do was watch and wait, and hope that when the time came, he would find the courage to face what he'd done and the wisdom to make it right. If making it right was even possible anymore. 3 months into the year-long test, winter settled over Lagos with its dry, dusty harmattan winds. Kofi had lost weight from stress and irregular eating, his reflection in the mirror showing a gaunt man who looked far older than his 72 years. Dr. Adeyemi visited weekly, concerned about both Kofi's physical health and his mental state. "You're torturing yourself," the doctor said during one visit, checking Kofi's blood pressure. "Watching them struggle, watching them grow, it's eating you alive. End this, Kofi. Tell them the truth." "Not yet," Kofi insisted, though his conviction wavered more each day. "I need to see this through." But the truth was becoming harder to define. What had started as a test of character had evolved into something far more complex. His children weren't just enduring their assignments, they were being transformed by them. And in watching that transformation, Kofi was being transformed too. Marcus had become someone Kofi barely recognized. The sharp-suited executive who'd arrived in Lagos 3 months ago had been replaced by a man who wore kitchen whites with pride, whose hands bore the scars of honest work, whose eyes had softened with something that looked like contentment. One morning, Kofi watched through the restaurant cameras as a young man came to the back door looking for work. He was maybe 17, thin and desperate, his clothes threadbare. "Please," the young man begged Chinyu. "Any job. I can wash dishes, sweep floors, anything. My mother is sick, and my sisters need to eat." Chinyu's face was sympathetic but firm. "We're not hiring right now. I'm sorry." The young man's face crumpled. "Please. I'll work for half wages. I just need something." Marcus, who'd been prepping vegetables nearby, set down his knife. "Wait." He approached the young man. "What's your name?" "Emmanuel, sir." "How old are you, Emmanuel?" 17. "I finished secondary school last year, but there's no money for university." Marcus studied him for a long moment, and Kofi saw something shift in his eldest son's face. Recognition, perhaps, of the desperation that had once driven Kofi himself. "Chinyu," Marcus said, "what if we created a trainee position? Someone who could learn the kitchen while also handling some of the cleaning and prep work. We could split the cost with the front-of-house budget." Chinyu raised an eyebrow. "We don't have budget for new positions. What if I donated part of my wages to cover it? Just for the first few months, until we can prove the value and get it approved properly." Kofi's breath caught. Marcus was offering to give away the little money he earned, money he was living on with no other income, to help a stranger. Chinyu looked at Marcus with something like respect. "You're serious?" "I'm serious. Everyone deserves a chance. That's what this restaurant was built on, wasn't it? Giving people chances." Emmanuel started the next day, and Kofi watched his son take the young man under his wing, teaching him the same skills Marcus himself had only recently learned. There was patience in Marcus's instruction that Kofi had never seen before, a gentleness that had been buried under layers of ambition and competitive drive. One evening, Kofi overheard Marcus on the phone with his wife Jennifer. "I know it's been hard," Marcus said quietly. "I know the boys miss me. I miss you all too. But Jenny, something's happening here. I'm changing. I'm becoming, I don't know, someone different. Someone better, maybe." "The business is falling apart," Jennifer said, her voice tight with stress even through the phone. David called again. "They lost the Morrison account. That's 3 major clients in as many months, Marcus." "I know. Do you really? Because from here, it looks like you're throwing away everything we built for some kind of penance that your dead father demanded. And I'm trying to be supportive, but I don't understand. Help me understand." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Do you remember when we first met? I was in business school, working 3 side jobs, determined to prove I didn't need my father's money or connections. I was so driven, so focused. You said you fell in love with that fire." "I remember. But somewhere along the way, that fire became about something else. It stopped being about building something meaningful and started being about winning. About proving I was smarter, better, more successful than everyone else. Even more successful than my father." Marcus's voice cracked. "Jenny, I forgot why I started. I forgot what mattered. And now, standing in this kitchen, teaching Emmanuel how to properly dice an onion, I'm remembering. I'm remembering who I wanted to be before I became so obsessed with proving who I was." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Jennifer spoke, her voice softer. "Are you happy?" "I'm finding my way back to something that might become happiness. Does that make sense?" "It does. I just hope you find your way back to us too." "I will. I promise. 1 year. That's all I need." After the call ended, Marcus sat alone in his small room, and Kofi watched his son's shoulders shake with silent tears. The success Marcus had built was crumbling, and he was letting it crumble, choosing something else, something Kofi himself had never chosen when faced with the same decision. Kofi had sacrificed his family for his empire. Marcus was choosing differently. Across the city, Amara was making her own choices. The business idea she'd mentioned to Grace had taken root and grown into something concrete. Amara had been using her limited free time to develop a business plan for a cooperative cleaning service, one owned and operated by the workers themselves, where profits would be shared equitably rather than extracted by distant shareholders. Kofi discovered this when he overheard a conversation between Amara and Terence during one of Terence's visits from London. "You can't be serious," Terence said, his voice strained. You want to give up your inheritance to start a cleaning cooperative? I want to use whatever inheritance I receive to fund something meaningful, Amara corrected. There's a difference. Amara, you're a Mensa. You have access to opportunities these people could never dream of. Why would you tie yourself to something so small? Small. Amara's voice was sharp. Grace supports 3 siblings on her wages. Mrs. Okafor has been cleaning hotel rooms for decades and still can't afford to retire. These women work harder than anyone I've ever known, and they have nothing to show for it because the system is designed to keep them exactly where they are. That's not small, Terrence. That's everything. This is guilt talking. You feel bad about your privilege, so you want to give it all away in some grand gesture. But 6 months from now, you'll realize you've made a terrible mistake. You don't know me very well if you think this is just guilt, Amara said coldly. This is the first time in my adult life that I've felt like I'm doing something that matters. Do you know what it's like to live in luxury while being empty inside? To have everything and feel nothing. You're being dramatic. I'm being honest. For the first time in years, I'm being completely honest. And if you can't support that, then maybe we need to have a different conversation about our marriage. The silence that followed was heavy. Then Terrence spoke, his voice tight. I'll be returning to London tomorrow. Call me when you've come to your senses. He left, and Amara didn't call him back. Instead, she met with Grace, Mrs. Okafor, and 3 other housekeepers in a small cafe near the hotel. Kofi had installed a listening device in Amara's purse, another invasion of privacy that made him sick with shame, but one he couldn't bring himself to stop. I've been doing research, Amara told the women, spreading papers across the table. If we form a worker cooperative, we can bid on commercial cleaning contracts as a collective. The profit margins in the industry are huge, but none of that profit goes to the actual workers. In a cooperative model, after covering expenses and reinvestment, all profit is distributed among the worker owners. But starting a business requires capital, Mrs. Okafor said practically. None of us have that kind of money. I do, Amara said. Or I will. My father's will stipulates that I receive my inheritance after completing 1 year of work. I want to use that money to fund this cooperative. Not as a charity, but as an investment. You'll own the business, control the decisions, and keep the profits. I'll be a worker owner like everyone else, with 1 vote like everyone else. The women stared at her in stunned silence. Why would you do this? Grace finally asked. You could do anything with that money. Why give it to us? I'm not giving it to you. I'm investing it in something I believe in. In people I believe in. Amara's voice was fierce with conviction. My father built an empire from nothing, but somewhere along the way, I think he forgot what he was building it for. It became about the size of it, the prestige of it, rather than the people it was meant to serve. I don't want to make that mistake. I want to build something that lifts people up from the start, that's designed around dignity and fairness rather than extraction and exploitation. Mrs. Okafor reached across the table and took Amara's hand. Your father would be very proud. Amara's eyes filled with tears. I hope so. I really hope so. Watching this through his monitors, Kofi felt his chest constrict painfully. His daughter understood. She'd taken the lessons of his life, both the successes and the failures, and was creating something better. Something he'd never quite managed to build despite all his wealth and power. And then there was Jabari. Of all his children, Jabari's transformation was the most unexpected. The aimless playboy who'd arrived in Lagos drowning in debt and depression had found purpose in the most unlikely place. After that dinner with Tun's family, Jabari had become obsessed with an idea. What if there was a way to identify talented young people like Tund and connect them with opportunities before they spent years struggling alone? He started small. During lunch breaks at the warehouse, Jabari began teaching basic business and computer skills to interested workers. What started as informal conversations evolved into structured lessons. Within a month, 15 people were attending his makeshift classes. Emeka, the warehouse supervisor, noticed and pulled Jabari aside one day. What you're doing with the younger workers, Emeka said, it's good. They're more motivated, more engaged. Keep it up. I'm just sharing what I know, Jabari said. That's leadership. You're investing in people. Your father did that too, you know. He couldn't walk through this warehouse without stopping to talk to workers, to ask about their families, their dreams. Half the management team started on the floor, and he's the one who saw their potential and gave them chances to grow. I never knew that, Jabari said quietly. He was a complicated man. Demanding as hell, but also generous in ways most people never saw. The question is, what are you going to do with this gift you have for teaching? That question haunted Jabari. He began developing a more comprehensive plan, a skills training and mentorship program specifically designed for young workers in the Mensa Empire's various businesses. He called it the Abina Mensa Initiative, naming it after his mother who'd always believed in education as the pathway to transformation. He pitched the idea to Kwame during one of the lawyer's visits to check on the family's progress. It would require funding, Jabari explained, showing Kwame the detailed proposal he'd developed. But the return on investment would be enormous. We'd be developing talent from within, creating loyalty, and genuinely improving lives. It's what my father should have done years ago but never quite got around to. Kwame studied the proposal with growing interest. This is impressive work, Jabari. Detailed, well-researched, financially sound. Where did you learn to put something like this together? YouTube mostly, Jabari admitted with a slight smile. And help from Tund, the young man I've been working with. He understands systems and efficiency better than anyone I've met. He should be in university studying computer science, but he can't afford it. There are thousands like him in this company alone. Imagine what we could accomplish if we gave them the tools and opportunities to reach their potential. Your father would be proud, Kwame said softly. Would he? Jabari asked. He thought I was a failure, a disappointment, the son who couldn't find his way. He thought you were searching, Kwame corrected. There's a difference. And now you found something worth searching for. That evening, Jabari called his siblings, a video call that included Marcus in his small room near the restaurant and Amara in her modest apartment near the hotel. Kofi watched through the cameras, his heart in his throat. I wanted to show you both something, Jabari said, sharing his screen to display the Abina Mensa Initiative proposal. I've been working on this for the past few weeks, and I think it could be really important. He walked them through the plan, his voice gaining confidence as he explained the structure, the budget, the expected outcomes. Marcus and Amara listened intently, asking sharp questions that Jabari answered with increasing expertise. When he finished, Marcus was the first to speak. This is brilliant, Jabari. Seriously. This is exactly the kind of thing Dad's empire needs. It's innovative, it's compassionate, and it makes good business sense. I agree, Amara added. And I love that you named it after Mom. She would have loved this. There's just one problem, Jabari said. It needs funding to get started. More than I'll have from my inheritance share, assuming I actually get that at the end of all this. So I was thinking, what if we pooled our inheritances? What if instead of dividing everything up and going our separate ways, we used it to build something together? The Abina Mensa Initiative, Amara's cleaning cooperative, may be expanding Marcus's idea of creating training positions in the restaurants. We could build something Dad never did, a business empire that actually puts people first. The silence stretched for a moment. Then Marcus smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. I'm in. Me too, Amara said. Absolutely. Really? Jabari asked, surprised by their immediate agreement. Really? Marcus confirmed. These past 3 months have taught me something. The empire Dad built is impressive, but it's also soulless. It makes money, but it doesn't make meaning. What you're proposing, what Amara's building, that's meaning. That's legacy that actually matters. When did you become so wise? Amara teased. When I started cutting onions for a living and realized how little I actually knew about anything important, Marcus replied with a laugh. They talked for another hour, dreaming together, planning together, arguing and agreeing and supporting each other in ways that reminded Kofi of who they'd been as children, before wealth and expectation and distance had driven wedges between them. Watching them, listening to them, Kofi felt something break open inside his chest. Pride, yes. But also grief. Profound, overwhelming grief for all the years he'd spent pushing them away, testing them, doubting them, when all along they'd been capable of exactly this kind of vision and collaboration. His test had been meant to reveal whether they deserved his legacy. Instead, it had revealed that they'd been ready to create their own legacy all along. They hadn't needed his money to become the people he'd always hoped they'd be. They'd needed exactly what he'd accidentally given them through this cruel test: challenge, purpose, and each other. That night, Kofi made a decision. He called Dr. Adeyemi to his hidden apartment. "I need to end this," Kofi said without preamble. "I need to tell them I'm alive. I've seen enough. More than enough." "Finally," Dr. Adeyemi said with relief. "When?" "Soon. But first, I need to prepare. I need to figure out how to explain what I've done in a way that doesn't destroy what they're building. Because, Femi, they're building something beautiful. Something better than anything I ever created. And I'm terrified that when they learn the truth, when they realize I've been watching them this whole time, lying to them, testing them, it will shatter everything." "It might," Dr. Adeyemi said honestly. "But Kofi, you have to trust that the growth they've experienced is real. That the bonds they're rebuilding are strong enough to survive even this betrayal. You have to trust them." "I don't know if I've earned the right to trust them," Kofi said bitterly. "Not after what I've done." "Then earn it back. Show them you've changed too. Show them that watching them transform has transformed you. Be vulnerable. Be honest. Be the father you always should have been but were too afraid to be." Kofi nodded slowly. "I'll tell them at the 6-month mark. That gives me time to prepare, time to find the right words. And it gives them time to decide if they want to continue the year or if they want to walk away from everything, including me." "Fair enough," Dr. Adeyemi said. "But Kofi, one more thing. Have you thought about what you'll do if they can't forgive you? If this is the final break?" Kofi had thought about little else. "Then I'll have my answer. I'll know that I destroyed the most important thing I ever had, and I'll have to live with that for whatever time I have left." The words hung heavy in the air between them, a future neither wanted to contemplate but both knew was possible. As Dr. Adeyemi left, Kofi returned to his monitors. His children had ended their video call, but before disconnecting, they'd made plans to meet in person the following Sunday, their first day off together in months. They wanted to visit their mother's grave, to tell her about what they were doing, to include her somehow in the new future they were imagining. Kofi would watch that visit. Would see his children grieve together at Abina's grave. And then, when the 6-month mark arrived, he would reveal himself and face whatever consequences came from the elaborate web of lies he'd spun. But for now, there were still 3 months to go. 3 months to watch his children continue to grow. 3 months to prepare for the hardest conversation of his life. 3 months to find the courage to step out of the shadows and face the truth of what he'd done, and what he'd almost lost forever. This is just the beginning of this emotional African story. Watch out for the concluding part of the story. Believe me, this story will leave you speechless. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe to this channel for what is coming next, and more interesting family tales. Thank you for watching.